Imagine a sleepy afternoon in late August, the kind where the sun hangs low and heavy, painting the world in hues of gold and shadow. In the small town of Willow Bend, nestled among the sprawling plains of eastern Nebraska, the air buzzed with the hum of cicadas and the faint promise of a storm brewing on the horizon. Along the cracked asphalt of Main Street, a sleek grey sedan rolled to a stop, its engine purring softly before cutting off. Behind the wheel sat Lorraine Carter, a 48-year-old woman with a presence that commanded attention, her chestnut hair pulled into a tight ponytail, her hazel eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses, her posture straight as a soldier's after nearly 3 decades of service. She wasn't here for leisure, not really. This was a detour, a rare pause from her high-stakes world to visit her aging Uncle Henry, who still lived in the weathered farmhouse on Cedar Lane where she'd spent her teenage summers. Today, she'd come bearing a simple gift, a basket of peaches for the man who taught her resilience. Willow Bend hadn't changed much since those days, a handful of faded storefronts, a diner with a flickering neon sign, a grocery store where locals swapped gossip. Lorraine eased her car into a spot near the town's lone bakery, intending to grab a loaf of fresh bread to pair with the peaches. The yellow lines marking the curb were chipped and faint, weathered by years of neglect, and a "No Parking 476" PM sign leaned crookedly, half hidden by an overgrown maple. Her dashboard clock read 3:58 p.m. She scanned the empty street, no cars, no pedestrians, just the stillness of a town winding down. Close enough, she figured, stepping out with her purse slung over her shoulder, the warm air thick against her skin. She'd be in and out in 5 minutes. But fate had other plans. A sharp siren pierced the quiet, jolting her mid-step. A Willow Bend Police Department cruiser screeched to a halt behind her sedan, its red and blue lights slicing through the golden haze. The door swung open, and out stepped Officer Dale Ramsey, a stocky man in his late 30s with a ruddy face and a gut straining against his uniform. His badge glinted dully, his hand resting on his holster as he strode toward her, his boots thudding on the pavement. Lorraine turned, her expression calm but wary. Years of training kicking in assess, adapt, endure. Ramsey's eyes raked over her, from her neatly pressed blouse to the polished sedan, and settled into a scowl. "You blind, or just stupid?" he snapped, jabbing a finger at her car. "That's a no parking zone." Lorraine frowned, keeping her voice steady despite the bite in his tone. "Good afternoon, officer. The sign's hard to read, branches cover it, and the lines are faded. It's not quite 4 odd yet either." She gestured toward the curb, reasonable, unflustered. Ramsey let out a harsh laugh, more sneer than mirth. "Don't give me that. Time's up when I say it's up. You're parked illegally, papers now." His words dripped with condescension, his stance widening, as if to assert dominion. Lorraine didn't flinch. She'd faced worse than a belligerent, cop briefings under fire, crises in war rooms. But this was different, a petty power play laced with something uglier. She retrieved her driver's license and registration from her purse, handing them over with a cool precision that belied the spark of irritation in her chest. Ramsey snatched the documents, glancing at them with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "Lorraine Carter," he muttered, his eyes skimming her name, her photo a black woman with "Doctor" before her name. But he didn't linger, didn't care. To him, she was a nuisance, a target. "Illegal parking," he declared, tossing the papers back at her like they were trash. "Fine's $500. Pay it now, cash." Lorraine's brow shot up, disbelief breaking through her calm. "$500? For a parking mistake? That's outrageous, officer. And shouldn't you issue a ticket, not demand cash on the spot?" Her tone was measured, firm, a question grounded in logic. Ramsey's face flushed a deeper red, his jaw clenching. A black woman daring to challenge him in his town, on his turf, was a match to his fuse. "You telling me how to do my job?" he growled, stepping closer, his bulk invading her space. "Pay up or we've got a problem." Picture the moment tension snaps, like a wire stretched too tight under the weight of arrogance and defiance. On the sun-drenched pavement of Willow Bend's Main Street, Lorraine Carter stood her ground, the late August heat pressing against her as Officer Dale Ramsey loomed closer, his ruddy face twisted with fury. Her question, calm, rational, rooted in the law, had struck a nerve, shattering the fragile shell of his authority. At 48, Lorraine was no stranger to confrontation. She'd stared down chaos in her career, navigated high-stakes standoffs with a cool head. But this wasn't a briefing room or a battlefield. This was a small-town street, and Ramsey wasn't interested in reason. To him, her refusal to bow was an insult, her very presence a threat to his reign. "You people always got an excuse," Ramsey spat, his voice rising, the racial jab landing like a slap. Lorraine felt the familiar sting, a surge of anger she'd trained herself to cage. She took a slow breath, her hazel eyes locking onto his. "Officer, I'm not making excuses," she said, her tone steady as steel. "I'm asking for clarity. $500 fine for this is excessive, and collecting cash isn't procedure. Write me a ticket, I'll handle it through the proper channels." Her words were a lifeline, an offer to de-escalate, but Ramsey didn't take it. He wasn't used to resistance, especially not from someone he'd already dismissed as beneath him. His face darkened, his hand slamming down on her sedan's hood, with a resounding bang that echoed down the empty street. "Procedure," he bellowed, spit flecking from his lips. "Procedure is you pay me $500 right here, right now, or you're going to the station. No cash, tough luck." Lorraine didn't waver, her voice cutting through his bluster. "I'm not paying cash on the spot. That's not how the law works. Issue the ticket." Her calm defiance was a spark to his powder keg, and Ramsey exploded. "Stubborn, huh?" he roared, his hand darting to his holster. In a flash, he yanked out his Glock, holding it low but ready, the barrel glinting in the sunlight, a threat, just shy of lethal. "You want to push me? Hands behind your head now." A chill raced down Lorraine's spine, her soldier's instincts flaring. Ramsey was unhinged, his rage spiraling beyond reason, his gun a reckless escalation over a faded parking line. She scanned the street. Two pedestrians gawked from across the way, frozen, their faces pale with fear, but no one moved to help. She was alone, a black woman facing a loaded weapon for daring to speak. "Stay calm," she told herself, her mind racing through options. Fighting back was suicide, compliance was her shield. Slowly she raised her hands to shoulder height, then slid them behind her head, her gaze never leaving Ramsey's. Her eyes burned with suppressed fury, but her posture stayed controlled, a quiet strength he couldn't break. Ramsey smirked, a twisted satisfaction curling his lips as he holstered the gun and pulled out handcuffs. "That's better," he grunted, stepping forward. "Face the car." Lorraine turned reluctantly, the cold steel snapping around her wrists with a dry click that reverberated in the stillness. The cuffs bit into her skin. Not painful, but humiliating, a public shackling for a trivial mistake. Ramsey recited her Miranda rights in a mocking sing-song, his voice dripping with contempt. "You have the right to shut up and do what I say." He trailed off, shoving her toward the patrol car with a rough push to her back. "Get in. You're under arrest resisting an officer, causing a disturbance." The charges were absurd, a flimsy net to trap her defiance, but he spat them out with glee. Lorraine stumbled slightly, but caught herself, her dignity a fortress, as he forced her into the back seat. The door slammed shut, sealing her in a cramped cage that reeked of stale sweat and vinyl. The cruiser lurched forward, tires squealing as Ramsey sped off, leaving her sedan stranded by the curb, a silent witness to the injustice. The short drive to the Willow Bend police station was a suffocating silence, broken only by Ramsey's occasional triumphant glances in the rearview mirror. Lorraine sat upright, her cuffed hands pressing awkwardly behind her, her mind a whirlwind of strategy. She memorized the route: Oak Street, past the post office, a left onto Pine, mapping her location as the anger simmered into resolve. This wasn't over. Ramsey thought he'd won, but he had no idea who he'd just caged, or the storm about to break over his head. Feel the weight of a moment spiraling out of control, where the air grows thick with injustice, and the sun itself seems to turn a blind eye. On the quiet streets of Willow Bend, Nebraska, Lorraine Carter sat pinned in the back seat of Officer Dale Ramsey's patrol car, the cuffs digging into her wrists as the cruiser roared away from her abandoned sedan. The late August heat seeped through the cracked window, mingling with the stench of old upholstery, but Lorraine's focus was razor-sharp. At 48, she'd faced threats that would buckle most covert ops, hostile negotiations. But this was a different beast. A small-town cop drunk on power, turning a faded parking line into a battlefield. The absurdity of it burned in her chest, yet her hazel eyes stayed calm, a storm brewing beneath her steady gaze. Ramsey drove with a swagger in his posture, his ruddy face smug in the rearview mirror as he stole glances at her. To him she was a trophy, a black woman who dared to talk back, now humbled in his cage. The short ride ended at the Willow Bend police station, a squat, weathered brick building tucked off Pine Street, its peeling paint and sagging awning a testament to neglect. Ramsey yanked the door open, gripping Lorraine's arm with a roughness meant to degrade and hold her out. She stumbled onto the pavement, her boots scraping the concrete, but she straightened instantly, her dignity a shield he couldn't pierce. He shoved her through the station's entrance, his boots thudding behind her, a victor parading his prize. Inside, the lobby was a dim, stale box, flickering fluorescence buzzed overhead, casting shadows on a chipped oak desk where a bored duty sergeant slouched. A handful of officers lounged around, one flipping through a newspaper, another scrolling his phone, their indifference a stark contrast to Ramsey's bluster. "Got a troublemaker," Ramsey announced, his voice loud and spiteful as he nudged Lorraine toward the counter. "Wouldn't pay up, argued with me, resisted." The duty sergeant, a grey-haired man named Sergeant Hayes with sunken eyes and a perpetual frown, barely looked up from his notepad. "All right, Ramsey," he muttered, his tone flat, routine. "Take her to room 2. It was clear this wasn't new Ramsey dragging someone in for little reason, the station shrugging it off. Lorraine was marched down a narrow hall to a small interrogation room, its pale green walls peeling like old skin. A dented metal table and 2 plastic chairs sat in the center, the air heavy with dust and despair. Ramsey pushed her into a chair, her cuffed hands twisting awkwardly behind her back. "Sit still," he barked, turning to leave, his smirk lingering, like a stain. Lorraine's voice cut through the room, clear and firm. "I request a phone call." Ramsey froze, spinning back with a scowl. "Call who? Your lawyer? Go cry home to Mama." She met his glare, unflinching. "I have the right to a phone call. It's the law." Her words were a quiet hammer, striking at his fragile control. Ramsey opened his mouth to snap back, but Hayes appeared in the doorway, his expression weary. "All right, Ramsey, uncuff her and let her call," he said, tossing her a dismissive glance. "Use the table phone, keep it quick, watch her." He shuffled off, uninterested in the drama. Ramsey huffed, yanking the cuffs off with a grudging jerk, the metal clanging as it hit the table. He pointed to an old landline phone bolted to the edge, its cord frayed. 5 minutes, he growled, leaning against the wall with arms crossed, his eyes boring into her, certain she'd call some small-time attorney or a relative to vent. He was wrong, dead wrong. Lorraine flexed her wrists, the red marks a silent testament to her ordeal, and steadied her breathing. Her fingers, though stiff, moved with purpose as she lifted the receiver, cradling it awkwardly with both hands. She dialed a long, complex number, a coded line she'd memorized years ago, a lifeline for emergencies that bypassed civilian channels. Ramsey smirked at the extended dial tone, muttering, "What's this?" calling halfway across the country. The line clicked, no ring, just a deep, clipped voice answering instantly. "Command Center, state your business." Lorraine's tone was calm, professional, as if addressing a briefing room. "This is Colonel Lorraine Carter, service number 8221 Delta Kilo 9. I'm being detained without warrant at the Willow Bend. Police station, approximate address Pine and 3rd. Situation: arrested for alleged illegal parking and refusal to pay an illegal on-the-spot cash fine. Requesting immediate status verification and assistance under senior personnel protection. Protocols. Banda chiwas nbindoserandedus." Ramsey's smirk faltered, his ears catching colonel and protection protocols, words that didn't fit his script. He couldn't hear the response, but the voice on the line was swift, decisive. "Affirmative, Colonel Carter. Location. Noted, verifying and mobilizing support. Hold if possible. Assistance en route. Stay safe." Lorraine set the receiver down gently, her expression unreadable, a soldier awaiting her next move. Ramsey's bravado cracked, his voice trembling. Who are you?" She didn't answer, her silence a weapon sharper than any retort, leaving him teetering on the edge of a truth he wasn't ready to face. Imagine the instant a bully realizes he's picked the wrong fight, when the ground shifts beneath his feet and the air turns electric with dread. In the dingy interrogation room of the Willow Bend police station, Lorraine Carter sat poised, her wrists still raw from the cuffs, her hazel eyes fixed on Officer Dale Ramsey with a quiet intensity that chilled the room. The phone call she'd just made a string of military jargon, and a coded number hung in the stale air like a thunderclap, its echo rattling Ramsey's fragile ego. At 48, Lorraine was a force honed by years of service, her calm a mask over a mind racing with strategy. Ramsey, leaning against the peeling wall, felt the first tremor of doubt, his smirk replaced by a flicker of confusion. "Who'd you say? You were?" he stammered, stepping closer, his voice wavering as the words Colonel and Pentagon sank in. Lorraine didn't respond, her silence a steel wall, her gaze cutting through him. Ramsey turned to Sergeant Hayes, who lingered in the doorway, his sunken eyes wide with dawning alarm. He'd caught her call too enough to know something big was afoot. "Colonel, you're an Army colonel?" Ramsey asked again, his bravado crumbling into a pitiful squeak. Hayes bolted to the lobby desk, his chair scraping as he fumbled at the computer, typing her name with shaking hands. "Lorraine Carter," he muttered, scanning the screen. Seconds later, his face blanched, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Holy hell, Ramsey, she's Colonel Carter, Department of Defense." The words hit like a bomb, and Ramsey's legs buckled, cold sweat beading on his forehead. He stared at Lorraine, seeing not a defiant black woman but a ghost of his own, making a high-ranking officer he'd cuffed, threatened, and insulted. Panic seized him, his mind replaying every arrogant move in slow, horrifying detail. "Sir Colonel, I'm so sorry," he stuttered, lurching forward to grab the cuffs from the table. This is a terrible mistake, I didn't know." Lorraine's voice sliced through his babbling, cold and commanding. "Stand still, Officer Ramsey, don't touch me." He froze, hands trembling, a scolded child caught in the act. Hayes rushed back in, his apologies tumbling out. "Colonel, please forgive us, we had no idea. Do you need water? Another call?" The room buzzed with unease, the other officers now peering from the lobby, their newspapers and phones forgotten, sensing a shift they couldn't ignore. Less than 20 minutes later, the tension shattered with a roar that shook the stations. Thin walls, heavy engines growled outside, brakes screeching as a convoy of 5 black SUVs rolled to a stop, their matte finishes and discreet military insignias a stark contrast to the local cruisers' faded paint. Doors slammed open in unison, and a dozen soldiers in full combat gear spilled out, moving with precision, boots hitting pavement, rifles slung across chests. Leading them was Major Nathan Brooks, a stern man with a chiseled jaw and eyes like flint, striding into the station like a force of nature. The lobby fell silent, officers shrinking back as Brooks's team fanned out, securing exits with wordless efficiency. Chief Harold Grayson, a grizzled man with a potbelly and a permanent scowl, burst from his office, summoned in a panic. His face drained of color as he faced Brooks. "I'm Chief Grayson, how can I assist?" he stammered, his voice a thin plea. Brooks didn't break stride, his gaze sweeping past Grayson to the interrogation room. "I'm Major Nathan Brooks, Regional Military Command. We're here for Colonel Lorraine Carter." "Where is she?" His tone was ice, brooking no delay. Grayson pointed shakily toward room 2. "Right there, sir, she's fine, just a misunderstanding," Brooks signaled, and 2 soldiers flanked the door, pushing it open. Ramsey and Hayes pressed against the wall, dwarfed by the military presence. Brooks stepped in, spotting Lorraine still seated, her hands free but her posture regal. He snapped to attention, saluting crisply. "Colonel Carter, we're here as ordered." He turned to Ramsey, his voice a whip. "Uncuff her now." Ramsey fumbled with the key he'd already dropped, his hands shaking as he muttered apologies. Lorraine stood rubbing her wrists, her blouse slightly wrinkled but her composure intact. "Thank you, Major Brooks, and your team," she said, her tone calm yet weighted with authority. Swift as always. Brooks nodded. Our duty, Colonel. Grayson edged closer, his smile forced. Colonel, Major, I'm so sorry for this. Mess will investigate. Suspend Ramsey immediately. Brooks cut him off, his eyes flat. The Pentagon expects a full report within 24 hours. We'll be watching. We're taking Colonel Carter now. Lorraine walked out, flanked by Brooks and his soldiers, her head high as she passed Ramsey, who stared at the floor, trembling. Her glance was brief, a silent blade that promised he'd never forget this day. She stepped into the lead SUV, the door closing with a thud, and the convoy rolled away, leaving Willow Bend in stunned silence and a reckoning just beginning. Picture the quiet before a storm breaks, that eerie stillness when the world holds its breath, waiting for the sky to split open. Inside the Willow Bend police station, the air was thick with dread as Lorraine Carter stepped out of the interrogation room, her wrists marked by faint red lines, her hazel eyes steady as steel. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding outside. At 48, Lorraine had seen power shift before battlefields won, crises averted, but this was personal, a small-town tyrant undone by his own hubris. Officer Dale Ramsey stood pinned against the wall, his ruddy face pale and slick with sweat, his earlier swagger reduced to a trembling shell. The arrival of Major Nathan Brooks and his military convoy had flipped the script, and the station's officers, once indifferent, now fidgeted like cornered animals, their eyes darting toward the windows where black SUVs loomed like sentinels. Chief Harold Grayson hovered near the doorway, his potbelly straining against his uniform as he wrung, his hands, his voice a shaky plea. Colonel Carter, Major Brooks, I can't apologize enough, he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. This was a terrible mistake. We'll get to the bottom of it. Ramsey's suspended, effective now. His words were a lifeline, a desperate bid to salvage his department's crumbling facade. But Lorraine's expression remained unyielding, her silence a judgment he couldn't escape. Brooks towered beside her, his combat fatigues crisp, his gaze flat and unforgiving. The Pentagon doesn't care about your apologies, he said, his voice cutting through Grayson's babble. You've got 24 hours to submit a full report. Every detail, every failure. We'll be watching your investigation closely. Colonel Carter's leaving with us now. Ramsey, still clutching the wall, risked a glance at Lorraine, his lips trembling as he stammered, Colonel, I didn't know who you were. I'm so sorry. His voice was a pitiful whine, a far cry from the bellows that had echoed on Main Street. Lorraine's eyes flicked to him, cold and piercing, a look that stripped him bare without a word. She adjusted her blouse, smoothing the wrinkles with a deliberate calm, then turned to Brooks. Thank you, Major, for the swift response, she said, her tone steady, authoritative, a soldier reclaiming her ground. Brooks nodded sharply. Our duty, Colonel. Let's move. The soldiers flanking her fell into step, their boots a synchronized thud as they escorted her out, a protective wall of muscle and steel. The lobby parted like a sea as Lorraine passed, the other officers shrinking back, their newspapers and phones abandoned. Ramsey's head dropped, his shoulders slumping as the weight of his actions crashed down, cuffing a Department of Defense colonel, threatening her with a gun over a parking spat. Grayson trailed behind, his apologies trailing into a mumble, but no one stopped her. She stepped outside, the humid air hitting her like a wave, and climbed into the lead SUV. The door shut with a solid thunk, sealing her off from the station's chaos. The convoy rolled out, engines growling as they left. Willow Bend behind, a silent thunder fading into the plains. Inside the vehicle, Lorraine leaned back, the leather seat cool against her skin, her mind still racing. The soldiers sat rigid, their silence respectful, their presence a shield she hadn't needed in years. She glanced out the tinted window, watching the town recede, faded storefronts, the diner's neon flicker, the maple tree hiding that damned sign. Relief washed over her, a quiet exhale as the danger slipped away, but it was tinged with a deeper ache. She was safe now, her rank and connections a fortress few could breach. But what about the others? The thought gnawed at her, a young black woman, a single mother, a worker without a Pentagon lifeline who'd save them from a Ramsey. Too often no one would. They'd face the cuffs, the gun, the humiliation alone, their voices drowned by a system that sometimes shielded its own abusers. The convoy sped on, the planes stretching wide under a greying sky, the storm clouds parting as if bowing to her escape. Lorraine closed her eyes, the hum of the engine a steady pulse, and let the tension drain from her shoulders. She'd won this round, turned Ramsey's game against him, but the victory felt hollow. Her status had summoned the cavalry, but it laid bare a truth she couldn't shake. Justice wasn't blind, it was a privilege, and she'd just cashed it in. The fight wasn't over, not for her, not for those without her armor. She'd carry this day, a scar and a spur, into whatever came next. Envision a town trembling on the edge of its own unraveling, where the echoes of a single act ripple out to shake foundations long thought unshakable. As Lorraine Carter's military convoy vanished into the Nebraska dusk, Willow Bend was left in a stunned hush, the police station's brick walls still reverberating with the shock of her departure. At 48, Lorraine had walked out with her head high, a colonel reclaiming her power, but the fallout she'd ignited was just beginning. Officer Dale Ramsey slumped in the interrogation room, his uniform rumpled, his hands shaking as he replayed the moment his world collapsed, cuffing a Pentagon officer, his gun drawn over a faded parking line. The smugness that had defined him was gone, replaced by a raw, gnawing fear that mirrored the station's sudden silence. Chief Harold Grayson stood in the lobby, his face ashen, barking orders to a shell-shocked staff. "Get me every report, every tape now," he snapped, his voice cracking under the weight of the Pentagon's 24-hour deadline. Ramsey's body cam footage was pulled within hours, a damning reel of his snarls. "Pay up or else, now you people always argue," and the click of his Glock as he'd escalated a parking stop into a felony. The audio synced with grainy security, footage from Main Street, capturing Lorraine's calm defiance and Ramsey's unhinged rage. Internal Affairs descended like hawks, their questions sharp, their pens relentless. By morning, the story broke, local news blared, "Colonel cuffed in Willow Bend blunder," and social media lit up with justice for Carter, fueled by bystander photos of Ramsey's gun-waving tantrum. Ramsey's fate was swift and merciless. The police union tried a feeble defense, overzealous enforcement, but the evidence was a tidal wave and public fury drowned their excuses. Within days, he was fired, his badge stripped, his name a pariah in law enforcement circles. Chief I.J. Grayson, under pressure from above and below, suspended 2 other officers linked to similar complaints, their records now under a federal microscope. The Justice Department stepped in, launching a probe into Willow Bend's police force, and the findings were grim years of hushed-up abuses, mostly against black residents, a mechanic roughed up for suspicious loitering, a nurse ticketed into debt over petty fines. The town's quiet veneer cracked, exposing a rot Lorraine's arrest had forced into the light. Grayson faced the press a week later, his tie askew, his voice strained. "We failed Colonel Carter in this community," he said, cameras flashing as protesters chanted outside. "We're reforming new training, oversight, accountability." His words were a lifeline, a promise to stem the bleeding, but skepticism hung heavy. Lorraine watched the broadcast from her Knoxville apartment, her expression guarded. She'd declined interviews, waved off activists begging her to lead rallies. "It's not about me," she told a friend over coffee, her voice low. "It's about the ones who don't get a convoy." Her victory had toppled Ramsey, sparked change, but it underscored a bitter truth. Her rank had saved her where others would have drowned. The ripple effect spread beyond Willow Bend. Community forums erupted, demanding transparency. Editorials called for statewide audits. Black residents shared their stories, decades of stops, slurs, threats, each one a thread in a tapestry of systemic failure Lorraine had helped unravel. Ramsey retreated to a rented trailer, dodging reporters, his career a smoking ruin. Grayson's reform stumbled forward, met with resistance from old guard cops, but the spotlight held firm. Lorraine's case became a rallying cry, a symbol of what could happen when power met pushback. She returned to work at Fort Bragg, her focus unshaken, but the weight of that day lingered, a reminder of the fight still raging beyond her reach. Lorraine, it was a bittersweet triumph. She'd turned Ramsey's arrogance into his undoing, forced a town to face its shadows, but the cost was clear. Justice had come for her because of who she was, not what was right. The convoy had roared in for a colonel, not a citizen, and that disparity gnawed at her. She'd won, yes, but the system hadn't, not yet. As she sat at her desk reviewing reports, her mind drifted to those faceless others, mothers, workers, kids who'd never get a Major Brooks. Their silence fueled her resolve, a quiet vow to keep pressing, to wield her voice where theirs couldn't reach. Imagine driving through the golden haze of a Nebraska dusk, the plains stretching wide and endless, the horizon a canvas of fading light and quiet promise. Lorraine Carter gripped the wheel of her grey sedan, the hum of the engine a steady companion as she traced the familiar route back to Knoxville from Fort Bragg. Weeks had passed since that August afternoon in Willow Bend, but the memory clung. To her like a second skin, the cold steel of cuffs, the glint of Officer Dale Ramsey's gun, the roar of Major Nathan Brooks's convoy sweeping in to reclaim her. At 48, she'd turned a small-town tyrant's game upside down, her hazel eyes steady through it all, but this wasn't a tale of triumph alone. As the sky deepened to amber, she felt the weight of a truth sharper than victory. Justice had come for her, but not for everyone. Willow Bend was a fading speck now, its police station a crucible where Ramsey's career had burned to ash. He'd been fired, his badge a relic, his name a whispered warning in precincts across the state. The federal probe had gutted the department chief, Harold Grayson, scrambling to save face with reforms. 2 more officers ousted for past sins. Lorraine's arrest had ripped the veil off a town's quiet abuses, exposing a ledger of stops, slurs, and beatings against black residents who'd never had a Pentagon lifeline. Protests flared in Lincoln, hashtags trended, and the news cycled her story. Colonel's stand shakes Nebraska town. She'd declined the spotlight TV spots, rallies, pleas to lead, but the ripples kept spreading. A tide she'd unleashed without stepping on stage. Back at Fort Bragg, Lorraine slipped into her routine, her office a sanctuary of maps and reports. Colleagues nodded with respect, some whispering about her win, but she brushed it off. "It's not about me," she'd say, her voice low, deflecting praise like a shield. The red marks on her wrists had faded, but the ache lingered not from the cuffs but from the faces she imagined. A mother cuffed for a taillight, a kid roughed up for attitude, their stories buried where hers had blazed. Her rank had summoned. A convoy turned Ramsey's arrogance into his ruin, but it laid bare a system where justice wore a price tag status. Not right. That disparity fueled her, a quiet fire stoked by every unheard voice. Ramsey's downfall was total. He'd retreated to a trailer on the edge of town, dodging cameras, his bravado a ghost. Grayson's reforms stumbled forward new training, body, cam rules, but resistance simmered among old guard cops, and trust stayed thin. The Justice Department's probe widened, unearthing more abuses, each case a brick in a wall of reckoning Lorraine had helped build. Willow Bend became a symbol, a cautionary tale for badge wearers nationwide. Power unchecked could crumble when pressed. She'd proven it, her calm defiance a spark that lit a fuse, but the victory tasted bittersweet. She'd walked free, her dignity intact, while others stayed trapped, silenced by a system that hadn't bent far enough. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Lorraine drove through the plains again, the same route where Ramsey's cruiser had flashed its lights. The spot was unmarked now, just gravel and grass, but it loomed in her mind, a battlefield where she'd stood tall. She pulled over, stepping out to breathe the cooling air, the cicadas' song a faint echo of that day. No triumph swelled her chest, only resolve. She'd faced the worst of petty tyranny and turned it back, but the fight wasn't hers alone. It belonged to those without a Major Brooks, without a coded line to call ordinary folks who'd face Ramsey's gun and find no cavalry waiting. Their silence was her burden, their unseen scars her call to action. The story of Willow Bend didn't fade, it grew, a narrative etched into the American grain. It lived in barbershop debates, church pews, protest chants, a testament that justice could strike when pushed hard enough. For Lorraine it was a chapter closed but never shelved, a spur to her relentless drive. She'd return to her desk, her briefings, her battles, carrying that day like a torch not for glory, but for the promise it held. She'd proven no one could trample her without cost. That power bowed to truth when forced. To those who heard her tale, it was a challenge. Rise up, speak out, demand more. Ramsay's lesson was carved in his ruin. Impunity had a breaking point, and Lorraine Carter had found it. As the plains darkened, she drove on, unbroken, a colonel with a purpose, bigger than herself, her fight stretching far beyond that quiet road.